Welcome to Pink Caddy Garage. We're going to do a video today to show you how to replace your front brakes on this 1985 GMC pickup, but this applies to almost every, at least General Motors car from the late 60s to at least the 90s and early 2000s. So we're going to do our rotors, our brake pads, and our calipers, and maybe the brake lines too. Let's get this tire off and get started. Since we know we're going to be replacing this caliper, I'll show you right quick how we're going to get that off. Basically got two bolts with Allen heads on them. Now, on our new one, I'll show you where those are. So if you were to look at this from the back side, you've got these two bolts right here. So you're going to need a pretty good size Allen wrench that you can get at the auto parts store for removing that. But since we know we're going to be taking it off, we will go ahead and look at the line in the back and loosen that bolt while this is still bolted onto the vehicle. Since we know we're going to be replacing this caliper, we're going to go ahead and take the line loose, which is going to be this bolt right here. It's a 7/16. You don't want to take it off yet, but at least get it loose. It's a lot easier to do so while this thing is bolted onto the vehicle. So these two bolts that hold the caliper on, sometimes we need some persuading, so get yourself some leverage with, I'm using the handle off the bottle jack here, and not too bad. Let's take it the rest of the way off. All right, now that we've got our two bolts out, I went ahead and took off our brake line, set it up there, up out of the way, and then we're just going to coax this thing off here. Something like that. It takes a little wiggling. There we go. Next step is to get this little dust cap off. If you've got a screwdriver that has a little bit of a bend on the end like that, that kind of helps. It's what you end up with when you use your screwdrivers for miniature pry bars, but I admit I do abuse my tools sometimes. Well, that wasn't going to fall off anyway. Next thing we're going to want to do is get this cotter pin out that holds our hub nut on. It's going to be a combination of screwdriver and needle nose pliers. Get that straight as you can so you can pull it out through the other side. And then we'll take that nut off. Should not be on super tight. By design, it's just supposed to hold the hub in place like that. Once you get that nut off, you're going to find this little washer which you can back off by pulling your rotor out a little. It's going to be washer and bearing, and then you should be able to pull this rotor off. There will be a bearing on the back side there. We'll get all this cleaned up and put some fresh grease on it. Once you get that off, just take a rag or something and wipe the excess grease off of the spindle. Make sure it looks like it's in good shape. Doesn't have any marring or anything. We are going to need to get our bearing and grease seal out of the back of this rotor, so I'll show you how to do that right quickly. So we've got our rotor back on, and we just put our lock nut on, or our spindle nut, and put it on about 4 or 5 turns is all you do. Start pulling until you feel it actually hit that bearing on the nut. Maybe go in about 1 inch and just give it a sharp tug. Now we'll inspect that bearing and that grease seal. Your bearings, check them, see if they have any damage on them. If they do, go ahead and replace them. But at the minimum, get a fresh coat of wheel bearing grease on all of these surfaces. Repack your bearings and start putting things back together. Once everything's cleaned up, just want to get a light coating of wheel bearing grease on there. Same thing with your components. Repack your bearings with grease. We'll put a little bit of a coating on these other movable parts, and we'll start putting it back together. So looking at the back side of the rotor, we've got our inner bearing dropped in. Then we're going to put our grease seal on. Just get a little bit of grease on the outside of it. See if I can do this while I'm holding a camera. You don't want the lip of this to go inside. You want it to really sit kind of flush. It doesn't take much pressure at all. So just kind of offset your bearing driver or whatever tool you're using there. Get that in nice and even all the way around like that. Now we're ready to put this rotor on. One thing I ought to mention, we do want to clean this rotor. This one looked pretty clean, but many times they will come with a light coating of oil to keep them from rusting. So you just get a clean cloth, get some brake clean on there and wipe it off. That'll get any grease or residue off that new rotor. Do that to both sides. So everything at the front's just going to be pretty much a reverse order. Get our bearing in, get it seated in there. Then we've got our washer. Remember, it's got a little slot, so it only goes in one way, like so. Then we're going to put our crown nut on. We're going to get that a little tight just to take the play out. Not going to do our cotter pin or our dust cap yet. We'll wait till we're just about finished and we'll do our final adjustment on our wheel bearing. All right, we're about ready to put our caliper on. So you're going to have a pad that looks like this and another one here that has these holes in it. So the one without the holes is going to go toward the back and on the piston. It's going to have this little clip on it that just slides on there. Should come with new ones. This one should pop in with a little bit of a tension fitting, like so. The other one's just going to have to sit there, and you may have to hold it in place a little bit as we slide this thing over the rotor. You just kind of start it at the bottom here, rest it against this piece of the bracket that your caliper is going on, and just kind of work that on. As you get a little closer, you're going to have to finesse it in a little bit. These little washers are often in the way where your pins go. Once you're on like that, then you are ready to put your new bolts in that will secure your calipers. Forgot to mention to go ahead and, when you're putting these bolts in, to grease them up with the brake grease that comes with your brake parts. So basically I will put some on this part and down here where you may get a little bit of back and forth movement on your caliper. Usually don't put any on the back of the pads. I know some people do, so if that's your habit, no harm in that. But typically I will just put it on the bolts and maybe a little bit near the mating surface between the caliper and the bracket. Now let's get our brake hose back on. When you go to put your brake line back on the caliper, you should have two new copper washers that came either with the caliper or the brake line. One's going to go there, and then for a good seal, you're going to want to get one on the other side and then get this bolted in. Well, the sun's getting to a spot where it's going to play havoc with our filming, but we're going to put off the bleeding for right now because I like to have two people doing that, kind of the old school way. But in the meantime, I want to show you how to adjust this spindle nut right here. What you want is to get a balance between nice freewheeling movement like that on the tire and no play. And I think you can hear that. I'll put the microphone on the rim. That's too much. So we're going to tighten that down just a little bit and see if we can get rid of the play and keep our nice free spinning motion going now. Well, we ended up going just about a quarter turn, but we've still got a nice free moving tire here, and I can't feel any play in that. So the other thing you're going to be limited to, if you got to get your cotter pin in here, and so you may have to do a little bit of fine tuning on this nut in order to do that, but it's usually better. I usually tend to go a little on the looser side than the tighter side. But as long as you can get your pin in there and then get things bent up, you'll be good. Then we'll tap this cap back on. As soon as some help shows up, we'll get these brakes bled and we'll be ready to start on the other side. That's the last thing you need to keep in mind, is you need to replace your brakes in pairs. So if you're going to do the right side, left side's coming next. Thanks for watching.